Don't miss our first look at Index Xenos #1. Spiky Bits. What's up, Hobby Maniacs? Rob Baer with you again today, taking a look at the new transitionary rules for 8th edition for, of course, Eldar, Yanari, Harlequins, and Necrons. I guess, I don't know why Necrons are in this one, but here they are. Surprise! Evil robots. This is the brand new, one of 5 brand new index books from Games Workshop. Of course, you probably already know that by now. These things have been in people's hands for weeks. Now, this is an over 112-page book containing all of the rules to get, or data sheets, I guess, for each faction that I just named off. Of course, you got Craft Worlds, Drakari, which is Dark Eldar, whatever, Durakai, Harlequins, Yanari, Necrons, and then, of course, all the stuff at the back of the book, because you've got your war gear points. You also have your weapons values, which they tell you everything in this section here in the very back. Now, these are going to be $25 each. Not sure if there's going to be a bundle. There might be at your local game store if you want to pick up all 5 books to get all of the rules for 40K. But now keep in mind, this is just to get us to the point of Codex books. So at some point, Games Workshop is going to come out, with another Craft World Codex, 8th edition, whatever, and it'll contain all this stuff. It'll contain all the war gear and stuff back here. May or may not be in this format, but what I like about this format is that it leaves the door open to Games Workshop to be able to take any of these point values back here or any of these stat lines back here and change it via the General's Handbook, or perhaps that new chapter approved book that's coming out in December. We don't know yet. There's a lot of uncertainties out there, but nothing is set in stone. And if you look at each of the data sheets, the pieces are separate. So they've separated these things out so that they could, in theory, be changed easily. So that's a good thing to know here. Now, the Craft World book, the Craft World section has over 40 data sheets. The Drakari or Dark Eldar over 30. Harlequins, their normal 10 or so. Yanari's got the big 3. The special stuff that we saw in the, what was it? Oh, shoot. The books that just came out before we got all these 8th edition rumors and everything. The Gathering Storm books. Those specialized units that were in this book originally are no longer in here. However, they tell you, you can take some of the things over in here underneath this, and there's ways to do it, and it's very similar to like it was before. Necrons, of course, and how to do your Battle-Forged army, then all your appendix and things like that. Now, we're not going to show you the whole book because that's just silly, and a lot of people out there already know for their particular faction what those data sheets do, and they're already, all up on it and everything. But we're just going to show you an example section of each one and kind of some stuff to be aware of. Now, we'll do thorough tips and tactics breakdowns on each faction going forward in, the weeks and months to come, and give you our ideas from a competitive standpoint because, we have lots of ideas, but that would literally take hours to do. So that isn't the video for this. This is our first look, just to give you some pointers and some things that you might not have noticed at first look, because seeing these things on a cell phone, on little pictures, is very hard to do until you get the actual book in your physical hands, which a lot of stores out there are fortunate to have been able to do already. So, like I said, each section is going to have a fluff section, which isn't nearly as big as it normally is, compared to a codex, but we're going forward from there. Then it goes into the army list section, where it might give you some specialized war gear, some specialized abilities, the psychic disciplines, if applicable. Dark Eldar obviously don't get any of those. And then it goes into the data sheets. And then from the data sheets, they will tell you that, hey, there's a section in the back on a specific page, which generally they say, hey, you can take a piece of war gear. I think for Eldar it's 114 to 114. Yep, there it is. So here's your typical war gear for the Eldar, which is going to be it looks like it encompasses 2-3 pages, including melee weapons. And then before that section is going to have your points values for everything. So now I know what you're probably thinking. Oh, so I gotta add points to these war gear sheets, which, yes, in fact you do, unless they're a special character, which is gonna indicate, like right here, it'll say, hey, does not include war gear, includes war gear. So people like that, Prince Uriel, Magron Ra, or Eldrad, they are one price. But if you want to take like the Wraith, Wraith Knight, they're 402, plus ranged weapons, plus melee weapons, and then there's specific, where is it? There is a specific way that you can arm these. So you check under Warrior options. It tells you what it is armed with, and then what your options are to switch out. And then those options you need to check the points cost for in the back of the book here for each section. And it's going to tell you if sometimes they're 0, sometimes they are additional cost, etc., like that. And then Games Workshop gives you an example of how to put it all into a detachment roster right here, including war gear points and things like that. So that's just your overall breakdown. We're going to do one of these little kind of how-tos for each book. Now, jumping in to the rules for each faction here, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on them, but the abilities may or may not be included in each war scroll or data sheet. I'm going to interchange some Age of Sigmar terms, I'm sure, here at some point, which you can see under each unit section. You may or may not have Ancient Doom and or Battle Focus. As a matter of fact, if you take a Yanari army, you're going to lose Battle Focus when it comes to Craft World, just like before. So you want to check all that right there. Now, what I really like about the Eldar Psychic Powers, or any of the Psychic Powers for this matter that are in these index books, is you just to get to straight up pick them. You can roll a d3 if you want, or according to these rules, which may or may not be carried over in tournament play, which remains to be seen. Remember, all of this is all completely up to the clarification via the FAQs that are going to come out on release day. We know there's going to be some FAQs. Also, whatever the tournament circuits out there adopt, you know, maybe you have to roll, maybe you don't have to roll. I don't know. But as of right now, according to rules as written, you don't have to roll, which is really neat. Now, a lot of these powers like Conceal, you know, stuff that would give you +1 or -1 to your hit rolls wasn't that great in the past. But now in 8th edition, that is huge, because a lot of these abilities and these shots and these attacks, now some of these say specifically to shooting attacks, some of them say not to shooting attacks. They'll be like just attacks in general, which could count for both. So you really have to kind of suspend what you think you know and read a lot of these terms and these sentences for what they actually are. So a lot of these little kind of gimme little psychic powers that may or may not have been super worth taking in the past now are definitely worth more than a cursory look when you're selecting your army. And not only that, but you have the Runes of Fate, which may not be quite like the Runes of Battle, where you get like the double. You can either do what used to be called a Blessing, or what could have been called the Malediction in the previous edition, where you target a friendly unit or you target an enemy unit. Over here, you do specific things. And Doom, you know, it lets you reroll wounds against the unit. That's generic. Reroll all failed wounds, so that can be for shooting or not shooting. But up here, you have Guide, only applies to reroll failed to hit rolls for ranged weapons. And then Fortune is completely different than what we saw in the past. It's on a roll of a d6, you can ignore wounds to actually get through. So you get wounded, you make your save. If the damage gets through, well then on a 5-up, those particular wounds would be ignored. And they go as far as to say that things that have a similar effect, i.e. the Avatar Arcane's Molten Body ability, this psychic power does not affect them. So everything I see has a lot of caveats. Remember, 40k is a permissive set. It's going to give you that permission. Just because it doesn't say it doesn't necessarily mean anything in the long run there. Enhanced Drain gives you +1 to hit in a fight phase. Or if you used a Drain, you subtract 1 from hit rolls for that unit in the fight phase until your next psychic phase. And Embolden gives you +2 to your leadership, or subtracts 1 from the leadership of the enemy. And then up here, Conceal and Reveal. -1 to hit your friendly models with the Asuranai. I guess, well, there we go. We got Eldari. I can't keep up with all these terms. We're just going to call him Asuran because that's just silly. And then Reveal. Choose an enemy unit. It does not gain any bonuses to its saving throw for being in cover. So they work a little bit differently than before, but these all have the potential to be game breakers. And then there's a list of war gear here. Now let's take a look at a couple of quick things here. Remember, everything will have its abilities listed. It'll have its faction keywords listed. There's characters, there's things like that. Now, when it comes to jump packs, the fly ability, sometimes you're able to embark with models, which is really interesting to see. But sometimes you have models such as like the Avatar of Cain, which in previous editions might have been more of a kind of like a monster type deal. You'll notice here that the Avatar of Cain has a toughness of 6, and it's in 8 wounds right here. Remember, dreadnoughts in general now, which previously had an armor value, are around a 7 toughness with about 8 wounds, give or take. So now you're seeing, and this is kind of the same stat line that you're seeing for low armored vehicles as well, things like land speeders, etc. So you're basically seeing low armored vehicles and models that were monstrous creatures in the past kind of coming together in this middle area of stat line similarity. So kind of keep that in mind as you go through and you kind of take a look at some of these rules. Now, there's another thing I want to show you all that you might not have noticed that's definitely worth pointing out until we go through and we do our complete breakdown of the faction, is there's things like the Fire Prism, which they consider a hover tank. And a hover tank says distance and ranges are always measured to and from this model's hull, even though it has a base. Because, let's be honest, remember, a Fire Prism is a large vehicle that looks like this, that has a super tiny base that hides underneath the model. So the only way to make it fair for drawing for drawing ranges and things like that was to enact this rule. Now, this doesn't apply to everything out there. As a matter of fact, you'll notice that I would imagine that the smaller Viper does not have that caveat on it, which I already know it does. I'm just trying to buy time to show you that it does not. So remember, the smaller Viper is smaller profile on a larger flying stand, so that plays. If you'll notice in the main rules, most of the stuff in here, it revolves around bases, measuring to and from bases themselves. Now, it gets a little murky when you start mixing in terrain rules, but we're not going to get into that quite yet. That's probably going to be another thing out there to talk about. Now, also, there's the Airborne, which keyword or ability, I guess, that a lot of models are going to have. Those are basically like your previous flyers, I guess. Would be a good way to look at it. Now, Airborne, this model cannot charge, can only be charged by units that can fly, and can only attack or be attacked in a fight phase by units that can fly. So jump troops, for instance, can fly. There's a lot of things out there that can fly. They can intercept and attempt to bog down these models right here, okay? One thing to remember is that models that can fly have a minimum and a maximum distance they have to move every turn, or quote, they are destroyed. So keep that in mind. If a model cannot make its minimum move, or is forced to make it to move off the battlefield because its minimum speed, it is destroyed and removed from the battlefield. That model has either stalled or crashed or been forced to abandon the battle. So keep that in mind. If you do not fall back from combat with perhaps jump troops or something else that has the fly ability, they also have to do the same thing. So you can come up to a flyer, engage it in assault, but then both of those parties, assuming that this thing has fly and this is an airborne model, have to break off and fall back, which necessarily doesn't mean literally go in the reverse direction. You can fly over because you are not impeded by models or intervening terrain. So keep all these things in mind. Like, this is 10 pages of main rules, but they are actually very complex once you start breaking them down, and you got things like that. Now, another rule that we missed in the past used to be called Vector Dancer, and that's basically what Wings of Cain is now. Each time this model moves, first pivot on the spot up to 90 degrees. This does not contribute to how far the model will move, and then move the model straight forward. Once the move has been finished, you can pivot a further 90 degrees as before. So this will help you stay on the battlefield a little bit longer, because remember, your enemy can predict where you have to move. There's no more coming in from reserves. You start on the battlefield and you have to stay on the battlefield. If you cannot perform your move, or you fly off the battlefield because you're boxed out, you're destroyed. So while you can go over intervening terrain, you still have to end up within 1 inch away from them, so your enemy can kind of catch that proverbial fly ball as in editions past and kind of lock you out and make you fly off the board. So just a couple things to remember with those tricksy Eldars out there, folks. There are some really interesting rules that are still kind of adapted over, but some things you need to definitely be aware of right there. And then not to mention that the whole damage characteristic and the changing of stat values here based on how much damage a model has taken. Now let's take a look at the Dark Eldar real quick. So the Dark Eldar don't have any psychic powers because that's not really their jam, right? But they do have the power from pain, and they do have the combat drug ability. Now the power from pain all stacks right on top of each other depending on the battle round. And these things that weren't necessarily that great before definitely are better in 8th edition. Being able to ignore wounds here, reroll the distance when determining advances or charges. Remember, advances the new run rule. Adding 1 to hit rolls for a unit with this ability, that seems pretty good in combat. That's definitely something that the Dark Eldar would benefit from. Automatically passing morale checks, subtracting 1 from the leadership of enemy units, and these are all cumulative together. Now, combat drugs are really interesting too. They say you can just pick a combat drug. So your Billy Badass units that you're picking for Dark Eldar, you're going to be able to just be like, if they have access to combat drugs, of course, just pick what you want from a menu right here. And you can even pick the same thing twice, but unfortunately you have to go through and have to use up every other of the 5 combat drugs on this menu right here before you assign it out to another unit, which is really interesting. So you have to take them all at least once each if you're going to choose it from a menu instead of just rolling it up random, which I think is pretty cool because that's one of the mechanics that Dark Eldar kind of lacked in the past, was the ability to have predictable combat drugs for certain units. So keep that in mind there. Now I don't know how it's all going to kind of come together, you know, in the future when you field an army on the tabletop. But that being said, it's definitely going to be worth seeing for sure. And then you've got all of your units, of course. Some really interesting abilities in here. I haven't necessarily saw anything that kind of really jumped out at me as, oh, hey, that's something you need to kind of keep an eye on. Now, remember, just like I said before, stuff like Venoms, they're not going to have that ability, that skimmer ability that we talked about, but they do have some cool stuff, like the flicker fields actually got better. Subtract 1 from all hit rolls, which target this model in the shooting phase, not the combat phase. Has a 5-up invulnerable save against ranged weapons. That's definitely helpful. The Raider itself also is not the crazy skimmer rule because it has those nice little compact flying stands there. So lots of stuff in here. And then, of course, as you would imagine, there is the supersonic rule, which is coming into play here as well. Check that one out. It's definitely something to be aware of. Now, the Harlequins were always an army that had so much potential on the tabletop, and it was really sad to see that they just couldn't make it in the competitive 7th edition scene because they are so characterful on the tabletop. I mean, all the colors, all the just hobby goodness, like everything about the hobby is exhibited in a Harlequin army because they have so much potential for things to be done with them. And it was kind of sad to see that they just kind of got like dropped by the wayside when it came to their rules. But that being said, in the new edition, they've got some really exciting mechanics. Again, things that didn't seem that good at first look before. Like a lot of the abilities they had, like the leadership manipulation and things like that, really come into their own in this edition. Now, who knows how it'll all shake up. Like I said, I haven't even made an army list for any of these things right here. I've played 1 game. I've been part of 6 games, you know, helping to walk through the rules and things like that. So I'm in no means an expert on any of these things, and I definitely haven't seen the Eldar in any form on the tabletop. But I have very high hopes for the Harlequins in particular. I don't know, they just strike my fancy here. So again, you've got some abilities that may or may not come into play, depending on if they are available to these guys here. Like you would see the Rising Crescendo is an ability conferred over to the troop right here. So with units with this ability can advance and charge in the same turn. In addition, they fall back and still shoot and or charge in the same turn, which is extremely powerful, to be quite honest, because they have a lot of good weaponry already. The ability to basically hit and run and bounce out of combat like they did back in the day may be good in this edition. Now they got the Phantasmacy discipline here, which again, really cool stuff. A warp charge value is 6, so it's easy to get off. Any Harlequin unit within 3 inches of Psyker can immediately move, as if it was the movement phase, cannot use it on a unit more than once in each psychic phase. But remember too, it's very hard to do that in match play, so that's not necessarily hugely a thing right there. Fog of Dreams, until the start of your next psychic phase, your opponent must subtract 1 from all hit rolls for that unit. That is all hit rolls from that unit that target Harlequin infantry units. That's huge, because Harlequins have a very, very tough time taking enemy fire, and that is a good one. Now remember, you can just pick these too, at least in these rules right here. I don't know if it's going to be carry over to tournaments and things. Mirrors Minds, it's kind of like a Mind War kind of potential, but you could do Mortal Wounds, so it's cool. But this Fog of Dreams right here, that the ability that the Dreamweavers used to have, or the Shadow Weaver, the Shadow Seers, gosh, used to have used to come with stock, is very cool. Now they also have some really other stuff right here. Like for instance, they have the Shield from Harm. Your opponent must subtract 1 from any wound rolls from any attacks made against this model, and for attacks against any friendly masked infantry units that are within 6 inches. So remember, also a caveat that we need to talk about real quick is that per the aura abilities, they actually confer over to the character model himself, because the character is within himself for that distance, which kind of makes sense, but they felt like they needed to put it on there. Over to Yanari, very similar in mechanic to how they worked in the Gathering Storm rules, which really weren't out that long, but they have the Strength from Death, so anything that is Yanari infantry or Yanari biker units, and the Incarnate, each time a unit is completely destroyed within 7 inches, one or more units with this ability, except in the morale phase, must pick one of those units to make a soul burst action. That unit may immediately do so. One of the following things, even if it is done so in this turn. So it's very important that they made that morale distinction, because remember, you can pick up whole units in the morale phase, and that would just completely trigger a bunch of things that could be potential to be abusive there. So I'm glad they made that distinction. Then it goes into what they can do, so they can move as if it was your movement phase. If a Psyker can attempt to manifest a single psychic power as if it were the psychic phase. Okay, I'm not sure that that's technically legal in match play, but again, FAQ necessary there. The unit can shoot as if it were the shooting phase, even if it advanced or fell back that turn. Unit can charge as if it were the charge phase, even if it advanced or fell back that turn. Cannot do this if it was within 1 inch of an enemy unit. And a unit can fight as if it were the fight phase. So a lot of potential here, very strong stuff. They can also get into Eldari transports that might not have the same faction keywords. So this is an interesting precedent that we might see in the future for when a lot of things, remember there's that whole transport thing that people really like to get, like if you have a Space Wolf unit and you have, a Space Marine drop pod or something like that, why can't they just get in it? It's silly stuff like that, but this is definitely a good way to get around it here and a really cool precedent. Revenant Discipline. You've got 3 psychic powers here you can choose from if you so desire. Things like this will cast Immortal Wounds. On a 1 it does 1, 2 to 5 it does 3, on a 6 target unit suffers 6. Ancestor's Grace, until the start of your next psychic phase you can reroll hits of 1 for that unit. Very powerful indeed. And Word of the Phoenix is another good one here. You can select a friendly Yanari unit within 18 inches that has not made a Soul Burst action this turn, and they immediately may make a Soul Burst action, pointing back to this table right here. So that's a very important distinction. And remember too, just like before, if they had a previous faction, they're going to lose certain abilities based on their previous keywords, like things, like the Harlequins are going to lose their Rising Crescendo, the Dark Eldar are going to lose their Power from Pain, etc. So make sure you read the fine print right there. And then it gets into, of course, 3 units here that we've seen in the past, and nothing else, because you basically have to draw them from the rest of the book right there. So cool stuff all the way around. Then we get into the Necrons. A little fluff on them. We all know basically that sort of thing right there. Then it gets into the big stuff. Talking about reanimation protocols. Again, not every unit's going to have it. Living Metal. Again, not every unit's going to have it, but if you do, you get to recover 1 wound lost earlier in the battle. Reanimation protocols are in effect all the time. So if you have a unit that has reanimation protocols, and it is not completely wiped out, and so you at least have 1 model with it still on the table, you get to roll to bring your models back each and every turn, which is really cool and definitely a departure from the past. They use a token mechanic and all this other stuff, and I really like this new version of this ability right here. And then you've got new Satan powers, which are kind of interesting. They all have the same names that we're used to, but with some different abilities that you can see right there. Not sure exactly how they stack up in current edition. They seem kind of middle of the road, perhaps on purpose, but I think they have great potential indeed. just the fact that the Satan themselves have really good stat lines is a very good thing. We saw Imhotep in the preview from Games Workshop, but there's lots of other cool stuff in here. There is an ability we need to talk about called the... Let me find a vehicle here. There we go, Quantum Shielding, which has a lot of folks excited. It's not exactly like it was before, but each time a model suffers damage from an unsaved wound, roll a d6. If that result is less than the damage inflicted by the attack, the damage is ignored. I.e., if this model suffers 4 damage, then you roll a 3 or less. On a 3 or less, the damage is ignored. Now, here's the thing. A lot of folks are like, wait, I don't understand how that works. So you got to remember that in the rule book here, they talk about fast dice rolling. This sequence right here is just done for onesies, for one, like if you shoot one las cannon or something like that. But I guess that's not a good example because one las cannon has the potential to do d6 damage, right? So we'll just say one bolter. Say you have a bolt pistol and the rest of the squad has a bolt pistol, or bolters. You could, well, that's not a good example either because according to the fast dice rolling, they have to all have the same to hit rolls, the same AP rolls, etc., to go through this chart with just one set of weapons, and then you reset to maybe another set of weapons like plasma or something, go through this chart. So keep that in mind when you're making your quantum shielding rolls, that you can wait for these fast rolls to come in as well as the single rolls as well. That might, because you're not going to shoot one bolter at something and then you're like, okay, well, you did 1 damage, I need to roll 1 or less. No, if you have 10 bolters in an army or in a unit, you're shooting them all together using the fast dice, and whatever you don't save is the damage you took, kind of type deal. You know what I'm saying? So I think I explained that correctly. If not, please drop it in the comments there if there is a point of confusion still. Now, like I said, remember, these guys are some of the monstrous creatures are basically like small vehicles in stat line, which you're going to see here again: strength 7, toughness 7, wounds 8. But if you compare that to something like the Triarch Stalker that in years past were 10, 11 armor, give or take, you'll see that is very similar stat lines. So they're all kind of in this middle of the road kind of stat thing, and then you can jump up to like flyers and such, which have a completely different thing, and they're generally like hard to hit, which is kind of like the new version of the Skyfire, because things that have a Skyfire type weapon will say, hey, we can hit airborne stuff on there's no penalty to shooting airborne or something like that. But everything again is all put into these data scrolls, these data sheets here. So it's really interesting. You just got to go through and read them all. There was actually, you know what? We need to talk about one thing real quick. I think there's a new squadron ability, and I'm not sure which one of these would have it in this book. Maybe here. No, interesting. Okay, well the Warwalkers don't have squadrons. I wonder if the Viper does. Viper doesn't have squadron either. So there is a tank squadron mechanic that you can buy squadrons of tanks, the guard has it, and you set them up within 6 inches of each other, and then for the rest of the game they operate independently. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like anything that I saw yet in this book has that mechanic, but just be aware of that special rule 2, or that special ability. It is something to be aware of. And the Monolith, whew, Monolith is spicy. Holy cow, this thing is good. Well, it's better than it was, that's for sure. So lots of new potential here for a lot of the units that were so good in years past. Now, jumping over to points values, it's just like I said, they are going to give you a models per unit kind of standard here, and then how much the points per model cost. You're going to have to record all of that, plus any ranged and or melee weapons as well. And then here's the readouts for what all your war gear does. So like Games Workshop suggests, at least for right now, until we get a dedicated army builder type app, you're probably going to want to write all this stuff out. And then the stat lines, I don't know. I'm probably just going to go to the copiers and get some of this stuff copied out and laminated up for the armies I play, just so I have a quick reference, at least till we get some data, war scrolls or something like that on mobile. So that's pretty much it for this one. I tried to keep it to about a half an hour or so, just kind of talking in generalizations, giving you a preview of the book itself and some mechanics that you need to look out for. Like I said, we're going to have specific faction breakdowns with some ideas for armies in the near future. But as you can imagine, all of this stuff coming out at once is a tremendous amount of material to sort through and talk about. So that's kind of where we're at right now. So thank you so much for tuning in to this kind of first look preview of Index Xenos Book 1. Now, if you like what we're doing and all of our 8th edition features here on the channel, make sure you subscribe to us here on YouTube and turn on notifications so you can be the very first to comment and or like our videos. We have a ton of 8th edition content coming out, and make sure you go over to thelongwar.net, become a veteran of the Long War today for all that exclusive 8th edition early access videos that are going to be available early, 2 weeks early in fact, over on thelongwar.net.